Today, I'm going to help you learn to understand poker ranges. Understand that you will almost never know your opponent's two specific hole cards when you are playing No Limit Hold'em. And if you're playing any other poker game, you're also not going to know what your opponents have. That is not how poker works. So you need to learn to think in terms of all the hands your opponent could reasonably and logically potentially have, which means you're thinking in terms of hand ranges. What is a range? Well, a range is a collection of poker hands that a particular player can have in the hole, they're two hole cards, based on their actions and tendencies. As the hand progresses, you're going to narrow down the range of hands that each player involved in the current pot could have by considering a few things. First, their betting actions. Did they raise, call, re-raise, etc.? The bet sizes. Did they bet tiny, medium, humongous, over the size of the pot? Did they go all in? That's going to impact their range as well. Also, your specific opponent's general tendencies. This is where ranges get a little bit difficult because some people play very loose ranges. They play a whole lot of hands, and other players play only the best hands. That's going to heavily impact their ranges. And also, any sort of physical, verbal tells that your opponents exhibit may also impact their range. For example, say your opponent always jumps up and stands up on their chair and says, "Woohoo, I got a flush," whenever they have a flush. Most people don't do that, but say your opponent does that. If they exhibit that tell, and they only exhibit that tell when they have a flush, well, they probably have a flush, right? Or say, before the flop, the cards get dealt, and your opponent goes from kind of slouching in their chair to all of a sudden perking up. They're playing the pot. Well, their range just went from 100% of hands, because they had a random hand before, to now, top 10, 15, 20% of hand because they're obviously playing it, right? So you always want to make sure you're paying attention to your opponent's tells. Understand that you need to assign reasonable, logical ranges, keeping in mind that everyone will not play the same way. However, until you know your opponent's general strategies, you should presume that they will use reasonable preflop ranges. Now, when I say reasonable preflop ranges, I do not necessarily mean the perfect game theory optimal ranges. Say you're playing a small stakes cash game or a small stakes tournament, and you raise and then someone re-raises you. You should not presume that they are 3-bet bluffing often enough. They're probably not. If they re-raise, they probably have a stronger range than they naturally should because most people in most small stakes games do not re-raise often enough as a bluff. This is referred to as a player pool tendency. What do people on average in your games do incorrectly? If they do not re-raise often enough in general, you should probably presume your completely unknown opponent to you is not re-raising often enough in general as a bluff. That said, as you learn more and more about each specific opponent you are playing against, you should adjust the ranges that you assign. Notice that this does presume you are paying attention. When you are playing poker, you should not be reading a book or watching sports on TV. Do your best to actively pay attention to what your opponents are doing. Now, this doesn't mean you should sit there with a hoodie and sunglasses on and not talk to anyone and be super duper focused all the time, because that will make the game way more serious. And if you make the game way more serious, your opponents will naturally start playing a little bit better. People tend to not get loosey and goosey and have a sandwich when everyone is trying to demolish them. So keep the game casual, fun, but at the same time, do your best to pay attention to the things that your opponents are doing that are decently far from good poker. Let's go through an example. Let's say a straightforward player raises from the button at an 8-handed table. Everyone folds around to them, and they raise. This chart here, down below, is the game theory optimal strategy in this scenario. Notice the hands in red are raising, the hands in blue are folding. So, should we presume the opponent is using this strategy? Maybe they're a little bit tighter, maybe they're a little bit looser, but most people who have studied poker at all know to raise roughly this range from the button. So, you can assign them something like this. Now, should you be shocked if they show up with the Jack-4 suited or the Queen-8 offsuit or the 8-7 offsuit? No. So keep in mind they may have those hands some portion of the time. Maybe they don't, but keep that in mind. Realize that post-flop, ranges are going to change as the hand progresses. Okay? This can be based on the board's texture, the actions taken, and your opponent's general tendencies. Some people will play good, strong game theory optimal strategies, like in the highest stakes games or against good, strong players, but other players will not. You have to be very careful assigning very specific ranges for your opponents, because if you try to be very precise with the ranges you assign to your opponents, you're going to inevitably make plenty of mistakes because you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. It's important to realize that as a poker player, you're not going to be 100% right almost ever, and that's okay. So you get close, and if you're closer to right than your opponents are in general, the money is going to flow your direction. So let's say a straightforward player raises from the button at a 9-handed table, everybody else folded. You call from the big blind and the flop comes king, 6, 2. No flush draw. You check and your opponent continuation bets, let's say 2 big blinds. And in this scenario, on this relatively uncoordinated board, you think they're going to bet with their entire range. Okay. What should you do? Well, it's important to notice right off the bat, they do have a lot of kings in their range. They have a lot of pairs in their range, so the range is not total garbage. However, if they're betting everything in the spot, they're going to have a whole lot of hands that are not a pair. And so this is a spot where you may want to check raise decently often because, well, they're going to have a whole lot of hands that completely miss the flop. So definitely keep that in mind. You also want to consider, if I check raise, will my opponent call with a hand like ace 10? They probably should if they're betting with everything, but a lot of people will not. If they're only going to continue with, let's say, a pair of 6s or better, like, say, pocket 7s, queen 6 suited, any king, pocket 8s, if they're only continue with those hands, you can check raise them and absolutely crush them. So consider what your opponents are doing and what they will do incorrectly if you make a particular play. Let's say this time you call, though, and the turn is an 8. All right, if you know your opponent will bet the turn with top pair and better, so let's say a king and better, and check everything else, well, now at this point, you can play very perfectly. And this is a spot where a lot of players in a lot of small and medium stakes games make a mistake. They raise preflop on the button with a good range. They continuation bet the flop every time, which is probably fine, assuming they continue against the check raise reasonably. And then on the turn, if they don't have anything, they say, okay, I'm done. Or if they have an 8 or worse, they just check it back and hope to see a cheap showdown. So if you're sitting in this spot with, let's say, pocket 7s or pocket 3s or ace 2 on the turn, if you check and they bet, fold. This is a spot where you cannot fold against good players because they will logically bluff with stuff like 9-7 suited, 10-9 suited, random ace highs, random queen highs. But weak players will not be bluffing with those hands, which allow you to fold all of your bluff catchers. And if they let the turn check through, it means they have worse than top pair. So the question then becomes, what will they do with hands worse than top pair? Well, will they fold to a river bet or call a river bet? Some people will fold every hand worse than a top pair if you make a big bet, like 1.5 times the size of the pot. I mean, put yourself in your opponent's shoes. Say you have 9-8. You raise before the flop with 9-8 suited. You bet the king 6-2. You got an 8 on the turn. Check, check. The river's any card that's not a 9 or an 8, and your opponent bets 1.5 times the size of the pot. Puts you in a miserable spot, right? And if you can make your opponent in a miserable spot with an 8, which is, remember, the best hand they can have in their range when it goes check, check on the turn, well, then you're absolutely going to crush them, because when they have an unpaired hand, they're going to fold. If they have a 6 or a 2, they're almost certainly going to fold. And if they have an 8, they may even fold. And if you can make your opponent fold their entire range, well, that's going to be really, really good for you. Now, look, I realize that this is how you'd play against someone who is straightforward on the turn. And as players get better and better and better, they're going to start including more bluffs in their betting range. They're going to protect their checking range by checking back some kings, etc. If you want to see what good, strong, fundamentally sound poker looks like, make sure you check out pokercoaching.com and look at all the work we do with game theory optimal solvers so that you learn how to play closer and closer to fundamentally sound poker. But in most small and middle stakes games, people make the same errors on a regular basis. And the player pool in general, all the players you play against, different pockets of that player pool are going to play relatively similarly. And if you can find people who make this mistake we talked about here, where they play okay pre-flop, they play okay on the flop, but then on the turn, they play way too straightforwardly, you can get to the spot and absolutely crush your opponents, because it becomes very clear if you have the best hand or not. Or not even that, it becomes very clear if your opponent has a good hand or not. And if you know they have a good hand, get out of the way. And if you know they don't have a good hand, steal the pot. It's yours. It is vitally important that you get experience when it comes to assigning ranges. And fortunately for you, you can do this in every single hand that you are dealt in. In every hand of poker you play for the rest of your life, you need to be assigning ranges to the players involved in the pot. I realize this may be difficult at first. It may be daunting. It's really hard in multi-way pots when it goes raise, call, call, call. Now you have a bunch of ranges you're trying to keep track of in your mind. But do your best to make this a puzzle that you enjoy playing and solving. And, the tough thing about this game is that quite often you don't even get to see if you were right because the pot doesn't go to the showdown. But going through this process, every single hand you play is going to go a long way to helping you get experience putting people on ranges. And as you do this more and more and more often, you'll get better and better at it. And on top of that, it will just become what you do when you're sitting at the table without you even really thinking, okay, now I have to put people on ranges. Because that's what you do when you play poker. Believe it or not, the best players are not sitting around watching TV or playing on their phone or reading a book when they're playing poker. They are actively putting people on ranges. And if you're not doing that, you are giving away the opportunity to gain experience. And your opponents are making a point to gain even more and more experience that you're not getting, and that's going to result in them getting better than you at poker consistently. So, in every hand you play, assign ranges. And if you see that your opponent showed up with a hand that you did not think made up much of their range at all or none of their range, well, you probably messed up. To be fair, some people do random stuff, but again, when people do random stuff, you have to account for that in the ranges that you assign. No, they are going to do some random stuff, some small frequency or small portion of the time, right? You're going to find, though, that with lots and lots of practice, lots and lots of assigning ranges, you'll become excellent at narrowing your opponent's range, which will allow you to make better and better decisions, which will allow you to make more and more money from poker, which is what we are going for. So get in there, practice, work hard, and assign ranges every single time you are dealt in, or even when you're not dealt in. Anytime you see a hand, assign ranges. That's going to be it for today. If you enjoyed the video, do me a quick favor, click the like and subscribe button down there. If you have a poker friend who does not assign ranges, they might not even know what a range is, show them this video. They will be eternally grateful. And I appreciate it too. Good luck. Have fun. Thank you all for being here. If you have any questions about ranges, feel free to type them below. Maybe I'll respond. Maybe people in the chat or in the comments down there will respond. We have a lot of great people in the comments who are more than happy to help you get better at poker. So if you have any questions, post them down there. Good luck, have fun, and make sure you collect all of that range assigning experience. I'll talk to you next time.